I'm writing this sitting on the floor in the living room of our, now only my, house. The paintings have been taken off the walls, leaving only ghostly rectangles on the parquet, lighter than everything else. Sarah's last box left with her yesterday. The sound of the door closing was quieter than I expected. Not a slam, not a bang. Just a click. Just as final as the click of a light switch. The end. 10 years of marriage, 8 years of living together under this roof. And it all ended not with a scandal, not with drama, but with a quiet, chilling loneliness that now fills the rooms, echoing like a cave. And I'm the only one to blame. Not a midlife crisis, not another woman, not losing my job. Me, and my small, pathetic, ridiculous secret, which I carried through our entire marriage like a secretly festering wound, and which eventually poisoned everything it touched. It wasn't criminal or vulgar. It was just pitiful, and that makes it even more painful. My name is David Miller. I'm 38 years old. My now ex-wife is named Sarah. We met when we were 24, at a museum lecture. The topic was highbrow, postmodernism in American sculpture of the 80s. I went there not because I was burning with interest. I went because it was the right place. A place where you could meet the right girl, smart, refined, with good taste. I was already busy building myself into someone I wasn't. Sarah was, and is, the real deal. A spark in her eyes when she talked about form and content. A slightly ironic smile when the lecturer got too carried away. She caught my gaze and smiled. And I, panicking internally, squeezed out something about an interesting deconstruction of monumentality, a phrase I'd peeked at in the program 5 minutes earlier. She nodded, interested. For her, it was the start of a conversation. For me, the start of a great, 10-year lie. We got married 4 years later. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A pair of young professionals, me, a financial analyst in consulting, her, a talented literature teacher at a private school. We bought this house in a Boston suburb, nice, with a fireplace and a little backyard. Got a Labrador named Buddy. Talked about kids. Went to dinner parties with friends, hosted guests ourselves. Our life was full of the right attributes. Wine tastings. I quickly learned a few terms. A book club. I read reviews, not the books. Trips to the theater and contemporary art exhibitions, where I learned to nod in time, making a thoughtful face. Sarah genuinely lived all of this. For her, it was the air she breathed. For me, a complex, exhausting performance. Every social outing was an exam for me, one I frantically prepared for, gulping down summaries, watching analytical videos on YouTube, memorizing names and concepts like a cramming student before finals. So what was my secret, you ask? I am mediocre. No, not stupid. Not lazy. Just mediocre, an ordinary guy with average intellectual abilities, raised in a family where average was the worst insult. My parents. My father, a professor of classical philology, a man who could talk for hours about the nuances of ancient Greek dialects. My mother, a cardiothoracic surgeon well known in her circles. My younger sister, Lisa, followed in their footsteps, a PhD, a linguist. And I was the dark stain on the family crest. I struggled with math in school, remembered history only by dates, not cause and effect, perceived literature at the plot level, nothing deeper. I liked simple things. Baseball on TV, sitcoms, burgers at the local diner, music you could just nod your head to without delving into the poetry of the lyrics. But in my family, this was considered a sign of low development. Don't stoop to the primitive, my father would say. Develop your mind, David, it's the only thing that matters, my mother echoed. And I learned to pretend. First for them, then for everyone. For Sarah, most of all. I created the persona of David. Erudite, knowledgeable about art, politics, philosophy, capable of holding a conversation on any topic. This was my main project. My carefully constructed mask. And Sarah, bright, deep, genuine, fell in love with that mask. She thought she'd found a kindred spirit. And I found the most enthusiastic audience for my endless, draining performance. The first few years, the tension was sweet. The adrenaline from the risk, from a successfully carried out operation, to shine with the right quote at a party, to drop a smart remark about a new film by an Austrian director, whom I only knew from an article in The New Yorker. I felt like a con man who'd hit the jackpot. My career, by the way, was built on a similar principle. I wasn't a financial genius. I was a good systematizer, I knew how to present information beautifully, to package banal conclusions in complex terms. Work was just another stage. But over time, the burden became unbearable. Living with someone you love and constantly fearing exposure is torture. I began to avoid situations where my well-readness could be tested in depth. The book club. Sarah excitedly suggested we read and discuss books together, just the two of us. For her, it was romance. For me, a nightmare. I twisted my way out. Honey, I'm so tired from work. My brain is fried by the evening. Why don't you read it and tell me the most interesting parts? She'd agree, with a hint of sadness. Then I'd just pretend to read, relying on her summaries and online reviews. Once she asked me about a minor character in Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, whose arc she thought was key. I froze. I didn't even remember who that was. I muttered something vague about symbolic load. She looked at me with bewilderment. Not suspicion yet. Bewilderment. As if she'd heard a false note in a familiar melody. Intellectual debates. Sarah loved a heated debate. About a new law, cultural appropriation, the ethics of AI. I could only repeat commonplace, balanced, boring viewpoints that sounded reasonable but had no passion or deep understanding behind them. I was afraid to venture into territory where my knowledge ended and hers only began. So I retreated into rational neutrality, into common sense, which over time began to irritate her. It's impossible to argue with you, you're like a wall. She'd say. I wasn't a wall. I was a void, covered by a decorative marble panel. Quiet moments. The scariest moments weren't when I had to talk, but when I could be silent. Lying next to each other in bed after sex. Sitting by the fireplace with a glass of wine. She'd look at the fire, pensive, perhaps running lines of a poem or a scene from a play through her head. And I, in a panic, would be running through a list of topics I needed to brush up on that week to maintain the facade. I couldn't just be. My inner dialogue was always about how to appear. I began to distance myself physically and emotionally. Not from a lack of love. From fear. Fear that in moments of real intimacy, when all defenses are down, she'd see the void behind the screen. That she'd realize she'd been kissing, laughing, sharing dreams with a facade, not a person. I became irritable, more tired, pretending is exhausting work. Sought solitude more often under the pretext of work. Sarah, naturally, felt this cold wall. She thought the problem was with her. That she'd become uninteresting, unattractive. She tried even harder. Suggested new joint activities, bought tickets to unusual events, read aloud to me, trying to stir something. And I saw in this only new tests, new opportunities to fail. I refused, brushed it off, blamed migraines. With every refusal, I read in her eyes a rejection. Her self-esteem, so fragile and luminous, began to crack and dim. And I was to blame. I, who was so afraid she'd see my imperfection, that I chose to slowly kill her confidence. We turned into a perfectly tuned, lifeless mechanism. We coordinated schedules, discussed who to call to fix the dishwasher, chose wallpaper for the guest room. We stopped talking. Real conversation requires authenticity. And I had buried my authenticity so deep that I could hardly dig it up myself. The crisis came last fall. Her best friend, Clara, came to visit, the one who'd defended her dissertation in comparative literature and now taught at Yale. Smart, sharp-tongued, with a penetrating gaze. I'd always been afraid of her. Over dinner, with a bottle of good Cabernet, I'd learned what to say about it by then. The conversation turned to a new novel by a Scandinavian author. The book was complex, multi-layered. As usual, I prepared. Read 3 reviews, noted key theses. When Sarah asked my opinion, I delivered my memorized monologue about generational trauma and narrative ecology. It sounded smooth. Clara listened, sipping her wine. Then she set her glass down and asked softly, almost innocently, "That's interesting, David. But why do you think the author chooses the motif of muteness for the climactic scene? Is it a reference to Wittgenstein, for whom language is the limit of the world, or more to the archetypal fear of losing one's voice, as in Kristeva?" The room spun. I knew Wittgenstein was a philosopher. I'd heard of Kristeva in passing. But to connect it to a specific novel? My brain, that pitiful imitator, malfunctioned. I felt the blood drain from my face. My throat tightened. I muttered something incoherent, like, "Well, that's, of course, a multifaceted question," and took a sip of wine to buy time. Time for what? For failure. I saw Clara's gaze shift from curious to analytical. She didn't smirk, she just saw, not necessarily the whole deception, but she saw the crack. She saw that behind the beautiful phrases was a yawning void. After she left, there was silence. Not comfortable, but thick, oppressive. Sarah cleared the table, washed the dishes. Then she came up to me. She didn't yell. She looked deadly tired. Her eyes, usually so lively, were extinguished. "David," she said quietly, and her voice trembled. "Who are you? I mean, who are you, really? At dinner tonight, I was looking at you and listening, and I suddenly realized it was like watching a very talented actor playing the role of a smart, interesting man. But I don't see you. Where are you? We've lived together for 10 years. We sleep in the same bed. But right now, I feel like I've been sleeping with a stranger. With a ghost. I'm so lonely, David. Lonely with you. More than if I were alone. This was my chance. The last and only one. To fall to my knees, confess everything, this pathetic, childish, 10-year lie. To finally lay out my mediocre, ordinary, but real self and beg for forgiveness. But fear was stronger. The fear of being seen. Of being found to be that average guy who doesn't measure up. I clenched up. Everything inside me tightened into an icy ball. Instead of the truth, defensive, evasive words flowed out of me. "Sarah, honey, you're being too dramatic. I'm just tired. This quarterly report at work. Clara always tries to corner everyone with her smart questions, you know that. Don't get worked up over it." I saw the last spark of hope in her eyes. The hope for a breakthrough, for sincerity, for contact, go out, as if snuffed. She didn't argue. Just slowly shook her head, and that gesture held more grief than any hysterics. "No, David," she whispered. "It's not her. It's us. Or rather, it's the absence of us. I'm tired. I can't do this anymore." She filed for divorce a month later. The process was quiet, civilized. No scandals over assets, the house stayed with me. She took the car and her things, no mutual insults. The lawyers sorted everything out. She said at our last meeting that she wasn't angry. That she just felt something had died inside this marriage, long before the finale. That she needed time and space to learn to breathe again. She even apologized. Can you imagine? Said that maybe she was at fault too, for not being able to create an atmosphere where I could be myself. That attempt of hers to take some of the blame was the most painful blow. Because the blame was entirely and completely mine. And here I am. In this beautiful, empty house, bought with money earned by masterful imitation of competence. Surrounded by books I haven't read, CDs of music I don't feel, works of art that are just colored spots on canvas to me. The mask is off. I have no one to perform for. And what's left? David remains. A 38-year-old man who doesn't know what he actually likes. Who, over decades of living a role, forgot the taste of his own desires. Who was so afraid of being considered ordinary that he destroyed something exceptional, the love of a real woman. I didn't destroy a marriage. I destroyed trust, the possibility of intimacy, the light in the eyes of a person who loved me. I stole from Sarah years she could have spent with someone who saw her not as an audience, but as a co-author. And I stole from myself the chance to be loved not for a fiction, but for reality. Even if that reality is me, a simple guy who likes baseball and dumb jokes. Now I face a long and perhaps fruitless task. To get to know myself all over again. To dig through the pile of imitative rubble for the bits that are me. It's terrifying, because it might turn out that underneath it all, there's nothing. The emptiness I worked so hard to hide wasn't an illusion, but the truth. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I don't deserve it. I'm writing it as a cry into the void. As a warning. If you're reading this and you're also building yourself into someone you're not, for love, for approval, for status, stop. Sooner or later, the facade will collapse. And under its rubble, it will bury not only your lie, but all the real things that could have grown beside it. It's better to be an honest, ordinary person who might be loved less, than to be a brilliant counterfeit doomed to loneliness in the very heart of what seemed like a perfect life. The secret wasn't worth it. It cost me everything.